Talking to someone recently, and he was kind of lamenting about his life, about his job situation specifically. He felt like he was stuck in a rut. He had been doing the same work for close to 20 years. He found it dull, uninspiring, and he felt that it wasn't satisfying his soul anymore. He wanted to do more creative kind of work, and he said to me, he said, Shiv, this can't possibly be what life is all about. And so I kind of listened to him. I let him talk about his issues. Now, his job itself is a fairly well-paying one. He's able to support his life comfortably. He has no financial issues and all of that. His issues tend to be more about his own sense of satisfaction with his work. And so I let him talk for a while, and then he asked me what I thought about his situation. And I said, well, you know, if you don't feel comfortable in any kind of work you're doing, you should look to move. It's not much more complicated than that. But as far as the question of, is this what life is all about? I said to him that for centuries, human beings haven't had much of an option as to the work they can do. The kind of options that we have today for work, for lifestyle, all of that, it's a novelty. Human society and civilization hasn't encountered this in all its history. It's only been in the last 100 years or so, and really, truly speaking, the last 50, in which we've seen this explosion of varieties of jobs and vocations that people can engage in. But prior to that, there was a time when if you were born the son of a blacksmith, then a blacksmith was all you were going to be. And if you were born the daughter of a farmer, then farming was essentially your whole life. And even before that, if you look at biological organisms, our brains are designed at a very primal animalistic level to seek out that kind of security. We're not evolutionarily designed to seek out novelty. We're evolutionarily designed to mitigate unpredictability, to mitigate uncertainty, to seek out situations in which our sources of food, shelter, clothing, and such are reliable. So, in that sense, from the perspective of the biological organism and what it needs to survive, that kind of a 9-to-5 job that has been reliable for 20 years provides all the creature comforts the body desires and requires in order to somewhat guarantee it a long and comfortable life, is, in a sense, what life is about for that organism, for the biological organism. Because survival is the game. That's That's the only purpose to life for the body, is to survive. For any animal on the planet, for any plant, even microorganisms, even viruses, one prerogative and one prerogative alone that they are programmed with, and that is survival. Reproduction ensures survival of the species, so that too is related to survival. Survival is the name of the game. And so, because I've heard this kind of complaint a number of times, is this really what life is about? And typically this is, people talking about dull marriages or dull jobs, dull lifestyles, which are safe and secure, but don't offer much novelty or variety. And the unfortunate answer, which really is deflating to hear, is yes, that is what life is about. From that perspective, from the perspective of the organism. However, we've also evolved to have this thing called the cerebral cortex, which is creative and imaginative. It is not so much interested in survival as it is in abstract realities, abstract worlds, fantasies, and expressing that abstraction through the organism in the form of art, music, lifestyle, and even in some negative ways. But essentially that's an aspect that craves expression at all times. The problem becomes that we begin to confuse that part of our brains with who we are, and we begin to neglect the body and its needs as lesser in a sense, not as noble, not as fine, not as lofty as the needs of our higher minds, to which we incidentally attribute a higher self. That higher self we identify as being us, and the lower self, the one related to the body and the organism, we begin to disconnect with, in a sense. And so we begin to believe that the purpose of life is to create art. The purpose of life is self-expression. The purpose of life is justice, fairness, beauty, goodness, all these sort of ideals that emerge from that cerebral cortex that really other organisms have no idea nor any care about. Jungle law does not care for fairness or justice. Jungle law simply is kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. Survival is the name of that game. And yet, human beings, as we've evolved into creatures who can use the powers of abstraction to create alternate realities that overlay on top of the natural organic reality we occupy. We've come to think of that reality as superseding the biological reality. And you can see this in the rhetoric that we often see, political rhetoric around identity, politics, that you see in society is often around how the abstract self trumps the biological self. The abstract ideological identity trumps the biological reality in a number of cases. I don't want to get into that right now. That's not the purpose of this musing, but essentially that's what happens. And so there's a sort of inner divorce that happens between our higher idealized self and this biological body mind that needs some very basic creature comforts and assurances and securities and all of that. Which is all to say that what is truly required is a balance between the two. Because if one is lost purely in the ideology of it, if all of life and the only purpose of it becomes purely about self-expression or spiritual attainment and all of these kinds of things, and the baser needs such as food, security, comfort, predictability are ignored, then the body is placed under a state of constant stress and threat. And there is an inner disconnection at all times. There's an inner alienation that's felt. And people tend to then become very lost. A sense of depression, anxiety about life sets in because the physical world does not relate to them anymore. In separating themselves out from their physical bodies, they also then become gradually, over time, disconnected from the physical world. And they begin to crave more and more abstract realities. This is why we see an addiction in society today to technology, virtual reality, video game realities, especially in children. Children are excessively addicted to video games, and when they're not, they suffer from all forms of anxiety because the physical world is not able to provide the degree and pace of stimulation that the virtual world is able to provide them, because their abstract minds are now functioning at a certain pace of change that the physical world just simply cannot match. And this is why if you even take the ordinary adult and make them sit down for an hour of meditation, they'll lose their minds unless they've done meditation in the past or they're familiar with it, because their brains are not used to just stopping. One of my readers, Bob King, had in one of his comments on my last musing talked about these ranchers somewhere out in the US, I can't quite remember now, cowboys who transport salt blocks the traditional way, simply because they traverse terrain that is inaccessible by other forms of transport, and so they'll travel for months at a time on horseback, carting these goods across this terrain, and they go for weeks and months without talking to anyone, or simply watching the horizon, or tracking their cattle. And as a result of which, when they return to society, they find it difficult to adjust, or rather, other people find it difficult to adjust to them because of their ease of manner and lack of stimulation, engagement, whatever you'd like to call it. What we don't understand is our normal now has become a level of mental stimulation without which we begin to feel absolutely lost and anxious. And this is a symptom of our total disconnection with our physical bodies. Our physical bodies do not actually crave that level of stimulation at all. It's our abstract minds that do. And there's no limit to how much stimulation the abstract mind can indulge in. But there is a limit to how much stimulation a body can indulge in without being impacted. And so all this loops back around to my conversation with my friend who was talking about his job, and I said to him that in the end, whatever purpose we ascribe to life is almost always an abstract purpose. To believe in any way, shape, or form that life has some fundamental purpose for us is a misunderstanding. There really isn't one. The body is programmed to survive, and that is its only purpose, if you want to call it a purpose. But beyond that, life is entirely purposeless. And that's the beauty of it. And because it's purposeless, we have the ability, we have the freedom to create any kind of purpose we like. But in doing so, it is important to remain grounded in the needs of the body and not neglect them, not dismiss them, and not alienate them from yourself. Because then the result becomes one of being lost in constant seeking of novel purpose, new novelties at every turn. Because no matter what one finds, pretty soon that becomes the new normal and ceases to satisfy. And so we begin to search for something new. But that something new eventually gets old. And the impermanence of life then becomes our greatest torment, because that feeling of newness never lasts. And it becomes like an addict constantly requiring the next hit to feel up again, because our baseline is always a feeling of lack and deflation.